Who's actually going to get the most out of a 98-inch TV with an integrated 7.1.4 sound bar, and who would be better off putting their money toward a smaller screen or a separate speaker system? If you're on the fence about whether this gigantic setup is a smart move for a family movie night, a home office backdrop, or a gaming rig, keep listening. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The first thing that trips most people up with a TV this size is the question of space. A 98-inch diagonal screen translates to roughly 85 inches wide, and you need a wall that can accommodate that footprint without looking cramped. In my own apartment, the living room wall is 12 feet wide, so the TV fits with a couple of inches to spare, but the distance between the couch and the screen ends up being about 9 feet. That's the sweet spot for a 4K display of this scale. Anything closer and you'll start seeing the pixel grid, anything farther and you lose the immersive feel that the extra inches promise. If your room is smaller than that, you'll probably end up with a TV that dominates the space and makes the room feel like a cinema that never stops rolling, which can be uncomfortable for everyday TV watching or casual browsing. The biggest selling point here is the QD Mini LED panel combined with TCL's Halo control system. In practice, that means the TV can push deep blacks and bright highlights in the same scene without the blooming you sometimes see on standard LED sets. I tested it with a recent sci-fi series that throws a lot of neon against dark space backgrounds. The black stayed truly black, while the neon glowed without spilling over into the surrounding darkness. The result feels more like a professional-grade display than a living room TV. For anyone who watches a lot of HDR content, whether it's Netflix originals, Disney Plus blockbusters, or gaming on the latest consoles, the panel delivers a noticeable step up over the average 4K TV you'd find in most households. Now, the sound bar is where the package tries to differentiate itself further. A 7.1.4 channel Q-class system with Dolby Atmos and DTS, cranking out up to 860 watts, sounds impressive on paper. In a real-world living room, the effect is surprisingly effective. When I played a recent action movie with a heavy soundtrack, the explosions seemed to come from all directions, and the overhead Atmos speakers added a subtle sense of height that made me feel like I was in a theater. The bass is punchy enough to feel without shaking the entire room, which is something many budget sound bars fail at. If you're a gamer, the positional audio works well for first-person shooters, giving you a clearer sense of where enemies are coming from. However, there are trade-offs that matter once the novelty wears off. The sound bar is physically large, almost as wide as the TV itself, so it sits flush with the bottom of the screen and blocks a portion of the lower third of the picture. For most content that's fine, but if you watch a lot of news channels or sports where the scoreboard sits at the bottom, you'll be missing some data. The system does let you toggle the audio-only mode, which raises the speakers and uncovers the full screen, but then you lose the seamless aesthetic of a single unit. Also, the Dolby Atmos implementation relies on upward-firing drivers that bounce sound off the ceiling. In rooms with low ceilings or heavily textured ceilings, like wooden beams, the overhead effect can become muddled. So, if you have a low-ceiling apartment or a ceiling covered in acoustic tiles, you might not get the full Atmos experience. Another practical consideration is the TV's smart platform. It runs Google TV, which is essentially the same interface you get on many Android-based sets. The navigation is smooth, voice search works via the remote, and you get access to all the major streaming apps. What's less obvious is that the remote doubles as a Google Assistant microphone, so you can ask for weather updates or control compatible smart home devices without needing an extra hub. For anyone already in the Google ecosystem, this integration feels natural. On the flip side, if you're an Apple-centric user, you'll find the lack of AirPlay 2 support a bit frustrating, and casting from an iPhone requires a third-party app or a workaround. So the TV leans heavily toward Android fans. Power consumption is another hidden cost. The QD Mini LED panel is more efficient than older OLEDs, but a screen this size still draws a noticeable amount of electricity, especially when you crank up the brightness for HDR movies. In my tests, running the TV at a typical 200 nit brightness level for an hour used roughly the same power as a mid-range desktop PC. If you're environmentally conscious or trying to keep the electricity bill low, you might want to be mindful of the settings and use the built-in ambient light sensor to dial down brightness when the room is dim. So, who should actually buy this monster of a TV? First,